Coming to you from the Deep South, this is the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast. High impact leadership is not reserved for leaders, and it has nothing to do with your position, title, or rank. However, it does have everything to do with your character. It's time to climb to the next level and beyond, personally and professionally. Now, let's start making it happen with your host, Mac Story.
Hello and welcome to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast. And thanks for listening. Today you're listening to one of 15 episodes that I recorded with my wife, Rhea Story. So you'll be hearing both of us speak together. And we're speaking to you about a book that we actually wrote together called Change Happens, Leading Yourself and Others Through Change. And it's based on a lot of principles that we learned along the way. And we'll share some personal stories, some things that are not in the book. But as you listen to this, if you enjoy listening to Rhea, and I'm pretty sure you will, make sure you check out her podcast, which you can find on your favorite app by searching for her name, Rhea, R-I-A, Story, S-T-O-R-Y. And also, she's all over LinkedIn. She puts out a lot of content. She's got a lot of books on leadership development and personal growth. So be sure to check out Rhea. I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to today's episode. This is episode number 8 on chapter 8 of our book, Change Happens, Leading Yourself and Others Through Change. And today's episode is all about the fear of change. It's something I really like to talk about because as Mac and I were wrapping up last week's episode, we touched on how a lot of times, people are resistant to change. And when we embrace change, sometimes people stop embracing us. And it's so true. A lot of times when we are the first to jump on board with a change, then other people start resisting us because they're resistant to change. And when we really drill down to why most of us resist change, I think a lot of times it comes down to the fear of change. Fear is what happens when anxiety over something becomes overwhelming, right? Fear is an emotion that we, for the most part, create in our mind. And what's interesting is that we spend an incredible amount of time and energy being afraid of something that might not actually ever happen. The vast majority of our fears are completely unfounded.
Yeah, just to jump in here, Rhea, with you. I mean, that's one thing I had to talk myself out of is even though I've been a person who does typically embrace change, there's certain changes in life, though, that you actually don't want for whatever reason. And it's always that fear, but it's always a story you're telling yourself. I mean, those are some of the worst stories we ever hear in our life are the stories we're telling ourselves because a lot of times they're not true, but we believe ourselves all the time. So when we're telling ourselves a story, whether it's true or not, we believe it's 100% true until someone else out in the world maybe can influence us, or until we learn a certain thing and we literally change our mind, change what we believe. That fear eats people alive. I mean, the fear of change is so real, but it's made up for the most part.
Mm. I'd love to just touch on 3 common fears related to change. And the first one is just fear of the unknown. You talked about, Mac, that, for whatever reason, there are actually some changes in life we don't want, right? And a lot of times, the fear of the unknown is one reason that we don't embrace change, whether it is positive or whether we think it could be positive, because we pretty much like to know what's coming on. Most of us don't like big surprises in areas of life that are truly important to us. I mean, we like nice surprises like, getting a cupcake right on the weekend, or a great surprise like an extra day of vacation or something like that. But most of us don't like big surprises in areas that are truly important to us, because it comes with it a lot of the uncertainty and the fear of the unknown. And so to overcome that fear, we really have to focus on the facts of the situation rather than telling yourself that story that may or may not be true.
Yeah, you gotta tell them, Rhea, why a cupcake on the weekend would be so special to you. Most people in the world, that a cupcake might happen every day. It kind of seems a little weird and odd to a bunch of people that'd be your example there.
Well, we talked a little bit in a previous episode about the health changes that you are making, and I'm proud of you for doing that. And one of the things I realized is that it was important to me to continually challenge myself in area of health. And so one way that I do that is setting a physical goal, such as running a marathon pretty regularly. And so part of the reason I do that is because then I'm like, well, eating cupcakes every day might taste good, but it's not going to help me run that marathon very effectively. So I cut back on things like cupcakes and, some of the treats and things like that. And that's a good thing. It drives a lot of healthy behaviors and healthy eating choices. Not perfect, but it does minimize cupcakes to an occasional treat on the weekend. So that's one reason I look for it, is that's an example of a nice little surprise, right?
Yeah, and so, but I want, I mean, you are, I mean, you have a phenomenal perspective about what you just talked about, fear of the unknown. I mean, I want you to share a little bit about that. I want people to know why they should listen to you talk about change and the challenge of change and the fear of change. And I mean, besides you just wrote the book, I wanted to hear some of the personal side, because I mean, when I met you, something terrible was happening to you. You had been sexually abused by your father from age 12 to 19. And we met, and a couple of months into our relationship, I figured out that was happening to you, and I asked you about it. And I was the first person that you said that had ever asked you. And being who I was, it was going to stop that day. And you might not have necessarily, you probably wanted it to stop that day, but you didn't necessarily want to have that change in your life, that you're never going back home, what you called home, even though it was a bad home with bad stuff. Talk about, share whatever you want to fix out of what I just said in your perspective, but share about that fear of the unknown, even though, I'm thinking your life's going to be nothing but better. I mean, I'm stopping that. It's not going to happen anymore. You're not going back to that situation. You're either going to live with me, or we're going to go to the law, or you're going to stay with your grandparents. That's the way it happened and transpired at that moment when we had the conversation. All I knew is it was stopping. And I bet the fear of the unknown, even though I'm saying it's going to be better because all that horrific abuse was going to stop, you still had a lot of fear of the unknown. You wasn't just excited that life was just about to be better.
Yeah, and it's kind of like we touched on in a previous episode. A lot of times, even when our situation isn't great, and that's the example we used on one of the first episodes we did in the series, is that for me, even though the situation was bad, right, the unknown is a scary thing for most of us, because we do like to know what's coming. That's why so many people buy planners and organizers and make plans, is because most of us naturally like to look ahead and see, or just have a general idea of what's coming. And it's funny because the future contains an incredible amount of unknown and unexpected for all of us, and that can be scary. A known situation is always less intimidating than the unknown. And that's because it brings with it the fear. What if I don't like the new situation? What if, it's not as good as what I've got now? What if I can't go back, right? A lot of us have those fears, even if we don't voice them. And that kind of brings us to the second fear.
Hang on, no. I want you to literally say, what were you afraid of? Because I know you feared the unknown. What were you afraid of? Leaving that situation that was so terrible, and you needed to leave it, and it was terrible. But what were you literally afraid of? I mean, it was great what you just shared, but that was like generic. What was Rhea afraid of at that time? Because you had to have some fear of the future, something. I don't even necessarily know what I'm asking you to say, but I know you had to have the fear, because everything was unknown.
Yeah, I think definitely fear of the future is something that was big, because it's not a known quantity, right? At that point, it's particularly when you've gone through something traumatic, you're not sure what tomorrow is going to bring, much less next week and next month, and what the rest of your life is going to look like. And yet there's an incredible assumption that we're just going to plan our life and it goes great. But particularly for me, fear of the future was, I don't really know what's going to happen. I don't know, where I'm going to find a job, or how I'm going to support myself, or, how am I going to make a living, or what if I don't like what somebody does in response to me leaving my situation, right? There's all of that fear and that uncertainty about the future, because at the end of the day, we think more or less that we have control over ourselves. And yet we know that we don't control most of what happens in life. We do have control over ourselves. We always have control to respond to what happens in life, whether we exercise that control or not. But we don't control most of what happens in life. And so that brings it with it fear. What if I don't like what someone's going to say, or what someone's going to do? And I think that's what fear of the future comes down to, is I can't, it's then that's what I was just about to say, is that brings us to the second most common fear, is fear of losing control. I think that's a lot of times why we don't embrace change, is because we are afraid of losing control, because having control means we get what we want, right? So for me, and leaving that terrible situation, and going, meeting you, and you helping me escape, that's obviously a much better situation. But there's still some fear there of, well, I couldn't control you. I couldn't control a lot of things about my situation. In fact, I was pretty dependent on people around me right then, just, helping me learn to survive and cope. But having control means getting what we want, and more control equals more options, right? More influence equals more options. And so we fear situations where we lose control because we have fewer options. And
So
that's, go ahead.
so even though, like, in that situation, I was seeing that you were being controlled, your whole life up until basically that moment when that part of your life was over. I saw it as you were being controlled, but you saw it as you still had some control in that life, but you had no idea in the future life if you were going to have any control, even
Mm.
though it was being, you know, I, I'm talking to you about the future, but you ain't ever had that future. You ain't never had that kind of life. All you knew is the life you had before. So even though I saw you as 100% being controlled, you actually saw you as having some control.
Sure. And I think that whether that's an illusion we create in our mind or not, when, maybe we're in a job that we don't like, but we convince ourselves that we have some control. Oh, I could do this, or I could quit when I wanted to, or whatever, we convince ourselves that we have more influence sometimes because we don't always like to own up to the fact or take responsibility for we don't have as much control or influence as we want. And so then it's like it's vulnerable, right, to realize that, and it's a little scary, certainly. So to overcome the fear of loss of control, we really got to focus on what we can control about our situation. And for me, back then it was looking around and going, well, I can't control much of what's going on or happening around me, but I can control the fact that I want to be independent. So I'm going to go start making some money. And whether that meant, at the time, it did mean finding a job working as a waitress and making, $2.13 an hour plus some tips, it gave me a sense of autonomy and a sense of control. And so just focusing on what I can do, even though my world was just, completely shifting and changing so quickly, and there were so many unknowns, one thing I could control was, hey, I can get out and go get a job and start making some money. That's something that I can focus on, that I can control. And when we focus on that, we find that we get more control or influence in the situation. When we focus on the things that we cannot control, or the unknown quantities, or whether it's raining outside, then we find our influence decreases.
Yeah. So I'm gonna throw in that quote uh, that pretty sure is in the chapter from this book, from Nelson Mandela, and let you talk to it. But I mean, you just described it really. But Nelson Mandela said, "May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears." And you had to make choices that reflected your hope, not your fear. I mean, your life's completely different. If you would have went with a choice that reflected your fears, you would have a different life than making a choice that reflected your hopes. You didn't
Mm.
know what was going to happen, but you hoped it was going to be better than what you had been in the past.
Yeah, and I think that's true for all of us. When we make choices out of fear and instead of out of hope, it a lot of times drives the wrong choices, right? Because they're fear driven. And so it's really difficult to make a choice out of fear and expect that to be the best choice you could make in any situation. Because when we're afraid, we're desperate. And if we make choices from that perspective, it's really difficult to focus on what we can control. It's really difficult to focus on being proactive. So when we make choices out of hope, that's a state of being proactive and saying, number one, I'm responsible for the choices I make. Number two, if I'm going to make it happen, I've got to make it happen, right? No one is going to give you that new desired future state for you. You've got to work to achieve it. And that's critical because that hope is a positive proactive state. And the third common fear about change is fear of loss. And that's kind of where I think we're leading up to. A lot of times we can't achieve what we need or want most because we won't let go of what we want. A lot of times we want to reach forward to maybe a promotion or a better job in a new company, but we won't let go of the known situation. And so if we're not going to let go of it, it's just going to hold us back. It's just going to drag us back. For me, I absolutely wanted to move on with my life. But there's a fear of loss. And, I left behind a lot of what my world in terms of pets and horses, and I didn't have but a couple bags and pillowcases of clothes, right? I lost a lot of my personal things. And that's a fear too, is, well, what if I move from this situation to the new situation and I'm going to lose something, right? And we're afraid of that loss a lot of times. But when we're afraid of a potential loss, we're just focused on that immediate impact. And so we really got to shift from that to look for the gains, look long term. What am I going to gain long term instead of what am I going to lose in the immediate future? It's kind of like sacrifice, right? We have to give up sometimes to better ourselves or our situation. We've got to sacrifice something else. And focusing on the sacrifice can often turn into fear of loss, but focusing on what we're going to gain is going to help us shift into a more positive, proactive state so we can move away from that fear and focus on the gains.
Yeah, there's a quote. I don't remember who said it, but it wasn't me. But this I know it was a guy. He said, everything I've ever given up had claw marks on it, and
Ooh.
that's a good one.
Oh, I like that.
I guarantee you,
Ouch.
whoever got my Ford Raptor and my Corvette Z06, if they look real close, I'm sure they can find some claw marks on it. And
Mm.
when we started down this path, we started giving up a lot of our material things, and I've shared before, I gave up my Corvette Z06 with long tube headers. Things sounded like a NASCAR, like set off alarms in cars when you drive past it. And I mean, a lot of people don't care about that, but I did at the time. Today, I really don't care about it too much. I ain't worried about if I ever have another one or that kind of thing, but it sure was hard to watch that guy who bought it drive off from our house that day. But it was, that was a different kind of fear of loss, but it was about material stuff, kind of like you said, the stuff you had when you left it at home. But it was a fear related to the change. We were changing our careers. I mean,
Mm.
I was leaving manufacturing and you hadn't done it yet, but now I know, and I'm looking back and, it wasn't but a few years later, you were you were leaving the healthcare industry, and we're trying to figure out how we go help people. So, I mean, this book is based on stuff we've learned by living it. It's not something we didn't research all this stuff. We lived all this stuff. People say, how long do you have to prepare to write this book? How old am I? If I write a book today, I prepared 51 years to write it. This one was written a few years back. So I prepared maybe 47, 48 years to write that book. Not really sure. But let's talk about another quote from Andy Stanley. And he said, "You're afraid. So what? Everybody's afraid. Fear is the common ground of humanity. The question you must wrestle to the ground is, will I allow my fear to bind me to mediocrity. And again, that was the words of Andy Stanley. And I say, if you're going to choose to fear something, don't fear change, fear mediocrity.
Mm,
There's so many people out there in the world, in life. We meet a lot of those people. I mean, we do meet a lot of people who are hungry for a better life, or hungry to grow and climb to the next level and beyond, to make a bigger impact on the world, especially a positive impact. We meet a lot of those people, but a lot of them we've known for years, and they don't ever go there because they don't want to change. I mean, the change, like I was just talking about, all the stuff that we gave up. We meet a lot of people who want to go and grow and do more in life, but they don't want to give up their stuff. They want everything they got plus what they want in the future. They don't want to give it up. So relative to where they want to go, they're still living a mediocre life. It's not necessarily mediocre compared to some other people. I'm comparing it to where they want to go in life, like where we want to go today, where you and I want to go. We're living a mediocre life today compared to where we want to go. And we've already made a lot of changes, and we got to make changes that we don't even know we got to make in the future. And so there's a lot of people, we giving up about everything. So giving up stuff's we're about out of giving up stuff. But I mean, we've accomplished a lot. But for first 4 or 5 years though, it was tough. We gave up everything and we hadn't gotten anywhere yet. Today until COVID hit, we're super busy, and we're still plenty busy enough to keep us moving in the right direction. But so many people fear change when they need to fear mediocrity. I mean, a lot of what's standing in people's way is only the stuff that they have. They've got all this stuff that, especially people who are in debt and haven't paid for the stuff, they got all this stuff that they got to pay for. So it restricts them from making a lot of change in their life, because they don't see how they can change and still maintain their current level of living. They don't want to make sacrifices like you were talking about.
mm. Yeah, I really come back to that quote you shared about the claw marks. That is phenomenal, because when it comes to the fear of change, a lot of times we are holding on so tightly to that status quo, to that situation that we know of or comfortable with or familiar with. And a lot of times we allow that, we just sink our claws into it. We hold on to it so tightly that we end up settling for average, whatever average means to us. And there again, that's not a bad thing necessarily, unless you want life to be better. Here's the thing. Each one of us choose our own values. But if you are unhappy with any part of your life, personally, professionally, physically, emotionally, if you're not where you want to be in any dimension or area of your life, you're going to have to embrace the challenge of change and overcome the fear of change in order to get that. And I know most people would say, I'm pretty happy with life. Maybe I've got a good job and, a nice house, and there's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong. If that's you and you are completely 100% satisfied with where you are, then good for you. But most people every person I've ever met is not 100% satisfied at somewhere. And so it's really taking ownership of that and saying, okay, I've got to get over what's holding me back.
There's a lot of truth in that statement, Rhea.
I got a little on my soapbox there. Sorry.
There's a lot of truth there, though, and you speaking that leadership truth to people. And I mean, there's a lot of people who say they're content, but if they really will hit pause on life and pause on their world and reflect, a lot of them are saying they're content because they're afraid of change. They're content because they haven't changed anything. If they actually went and changed, first of all, they're afraid to change. Is why they haven't changed. But if they changed and saw what was possible, they wouldn't be content. So it's kind of like it's a never-ending loop they get hung up in. I'm content, but I'm content because I don't want to change. But if I was willing to change, because we meet those kind of people. We meet people who say, who could I help? I've heard a lot of people say, who could I help? Who wants to learn from me? And I say nobody until they know they can, because they've never done anything. They haven't written a book. They haven't done a podcast because they're afraid. They're afraid of the change, and they're really not afraid of helping someone. They're afraid of what everybody's going to think about them if they start down that path.
I think just to touch on what you said and kind of build on it, I think the key difference there is I'm content versus I'm fulfilled, right? I'm content means I'm settling. Good
Mm.
or bad, maybe it's the right choice for some people, and that's okay. I can't make that choice for them. But if we're content, we're settling. If we are fulfilled, that means we are growing and going towards that potential. Maybe we're not there yet, because I don't think we ever get there, wherever there is. But fulfillment is only realized and achieved by constantly striving to reach our potential. And if we are content with where we are, that means to me at some level that we've said, I'm settled, I'm going to be content. There's a difference in content and fulfillment.
Yeah, I want to share a quote that I wrote in my book, Defining Influence. Increasing your influence increases your options, and it just fits right here. And that quote uh, is my quote, but basically I say in there, uh, too often in life, people who are searching find what they'll settle for and stop looking for what they were searching for. And often the reason they stop searching is because they're afraid of change. They don't want to uh, initiate the change. A lot of times people are only where they are because someone else initiated the change. They didn't get there because they've constantly been initiating the change. But just want to say that, that little voice in your head is nudging you forward. It constantly plants and waters the seeds of aspiration within you. What is it inside of you that holds you back? What inside of you prevents you from actually climbing to the next level? It's one thing, and for everyone, it's the same thing. It's fear. It's fear of change. What we're talking about. I mean, I've heard people say, I'm 50 years old. I don't want to go to get a college degree, even though they may know they need one to do what it is they want to do in life. You don't have to have a college degree, but you have to have an education. And if what you want to do in life requires a college education, then you have to go get a college degree. I ain't telling you to do that or not do that. You have to figure it out. But I hear a lot of people make the excuse, well, I'm 50. And they'll be like, they thinking they're working a job, they're working a full-time job, and maybe they say it's going to take 10 years to get their degree. And you hear them say, well, I'm 50 years old. If I go to college, even if I get that degree, when I get the degree, I'm going, 10 years from now, I'm going to be 60. And I said, 10 years from now, you're going to be 60 if you don't have the degree. They just looking for an excuse. And a lot of time it's fear. Someone 50 years old, a lot of times they're afraid to go to college. They're afraid to go sit in a classroom with sometimes a bunch of young people, or they haven't really learned in an intentional way since high school for some people. But I'm telling you, there's some cool older people out there. No matter your age, if you think you need a college degree, you got to figure out how to get it. You may have to give up some stuff. You may have to pay for it yourself. You may not be able to pay for all the stuff you're paying for now and pay for a college degree. But I want to leave you. Well, we're not signing off just yet, but we're getting close. But a friend of mine in Ria's, a business owner out in Texas, Donovan Weldon, uh, he spoke these powerful words. I just want to share them with you. He says, the only person between you and success is you. Move. The only person between you and failure is you. Stand firm. What's that mean when you hear those words, Ria?
Um, to me, it means he's really saying, number one, we absolutely have to take action, right? And that's what he's saying. The only person between you and success is you. Move, right? We've got to take action. I always say, no one is going to fight for your dreams as hard as you will, right? No one is going to come and see your dream and make it your reality in the same way that you can and should, because it's not their dream, right? It's not, they don't have ownership of it. And so we, at the end of the day, have to take action and responsibility for that. And then when he goes on to say the only person between you and failure is you, stand firm. I think that really comes down to, there are times when we need to stand firm to our values, to what's true to inside of us. And that's not always going to be easy. And a lot of times when we compromise on that, then we end up in failure, because the thing is, it's only failure when we quit trying. And whatever it is that we're striving for, he's saying, you know what, stand firm, keep striving. You're going to have to be willing to try again and try again and try again, because that's what success is going to take.
Yeah, and he built his initial business from the ground up, and I think he's in business or partnership with his son now, if I'm remembering right, or he hadn't made changes since the last time that I was aware of what he's doing, but building another business. But will you embrace change? You, the one listening to Rhea and I today, will you embrace change, or will you embrace mediocrity? The choice is yours to make. And I said that wrong, Rhea. Is Rhea and me.
Yeah.
I
wasn't going to call you out on it.
That stuff drives me nuts. I don't really like the I word unless it fits, and it didn't fit there. I said it the wrong way. But I know how to do it when I write. When I speak, I just go too fast and I say it the wrong way a lot of times. But when I catch it, I got to be transparent and say, hey, I know it was wrong, but I'll fix it.
Yeah.
What's funny about that is you hear a lot of people use the word I when they shouldn't be. They're just trying to sound smart, and they don't really know that when you say I all the time, you're getting it wrong half the time or more. And so you really got to know. But when you choose to avoid change, you may be choosing to embrace mediocrity.
Yeah. And, I think that's kind of where we started this whole episode is, if you're going to be afraid of something, don't be afraid of change, because like we talked about on a previous episode, without change, there's nothing gets better. There's no improvement without change. And so don't choose to embrace mediocrity. Just a final quote I wanted to leave you with as you wrap up, Mac. Dale Carnegie said, courage comes with the sun. You can conquer almost anything that you fear if only you will make up your mind to do so. For remember, fear doesn't exist anywhere except in your mind.
I think we'll leave it there. Talk to you next time.
Talk to you next time.
Make it happen or someone else will. It might as well be you. Are you serious about taking your career and your life to the next level and beyond? Check out Mac Story's Blue Collar Leadership series books and others, now available on audio, along with paperback and ebooks at Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. Please visit bluecollarleadership.com to learn about Mac's books, programs, special offers, certifications, and more. Thank you for listening to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast.